So welcome to this webinar. This is Emotional Intelligence and Empathy. My name is Neil Wilkins and I'm going to be your host and presenter for this particular webinar. This one is actually episode or session 12 in our series supporting marketers and business developers and digital content producers, and in fact anyone in a communications role, to enhance and develop their careers both professionally but also personally. And for me, this is a really important topic. So I'm very pleased to welcome you onto the session here today. We're going to be using the chat facility as we have in the previous sessions to hopefully capture any questions that you might have as you go. So use the chat button on the menu panel that you have to post any sort of questions that you can send them to directly to Lauren, who's our host for today, or you can copy everybody else in if you send them to everyone. It's entirely up to you. And hopefully at the end of this session, we'll have a chance to cover and explore any questions or thoughts or observations that you might have. So, as I say, this is a series of really sort of interesting topics that we've been covering, everything from thought leadership and networking to communication skills, some more sort of technical skills in SME marketing, and most recently commercial thinking. And thank you to everybody who's returning back from some of these previous episodes that we've been covering. I've had a lot of really good feedback, as very interesting questions actually sent to me by direct message from these previous sessions. So yeah, feel free to continue to connect, and if you have any questions or wish to see any recordings, either contact Lauren or myself, and we will be able to put you in touch with the right kind of content, which hopefully will help your professional and personal development, because that is the essence really of this series. But we're here today to talk about emotional intelligence, and particularly a component of emotional intelligence called empathy. And we are going to be talking about this because it is one of those things that I would call an essential skill. These kind of things that were around and about, the sort of the wrappers around the what you might call technical skills in our work, used to be called soft skills. And I really don't like that phrase because it kind of implies that they're sort of optional, and that they're not really that important, and if you want to ignore them, you can ignore them. So I like to now call some of these things essential skills, and particularly the concept and the psychology behind empathy is what I would describe as probably one of the most essential skills in business and work life today. So what is empathy? I don't tend to do too much of a long sort of winded introduction as some people do on their webinars. We tend to jump straight into some definitions to set the scene. So this one is going to be no different. We're going to start really in at the deep end with what is empathy? Well, it's a component, so it's a kind of constituent part or an ingredient of something called emotional intelligence. When people think of intelligence, they often think about how clever you are, how sort of academically qualified you are. Well, this is the other end of that spectrum. This is emotional intelligence. And it is a really profound and really important way that as human beings we interact. And empathy as a component of emotional intelligence is in itself how we respond, think and behave, both internally, but also really importantly, externally, as a result of information that we collect from our environment about other people. Okay, so being an empath is about really being present in the presence of other people and using what we sense, what we see, what we observe and what we hear to make judgments and to make decisions and to enhance the relationship that we have with that person or those other people. So it's quite a profound thing. And it is one of those things that people who are highly successful communicators, highly successful in developing relationships with peers, with colleagues, with customers, they are highly skilled at empathy. So being an empath is a really important component of effective business life. It is almost that you can't really have relationships professionally with other people without being on the scale of being an empath. And of course, it doesn't just apply to work. This will apply to your personal life as well. So everything that we talk about here and explore, all the little ideas, all the techniques, all the ways of really becoming very aware of empathy, you can apply in your personal life almost as much, if not more, as you can in your work life as well. So let's get a little bit deeper into what empathy actually is. So this is a psychological concept, okay? And in the Encyclopedia of Social Psychology, the psychologists Hodges and Myers have come up with a definition which I think needs extending, and I'll explain why that is in a moment. But their definition, so this is a formal official definition of empathy, is that it's defined as an understanding of another person's experience by imagining yourself in that person's situation. So we have a phrase here in the UK that it's putting myself into somebody else's shoes. Okay, so that is like the formal definition within social psychology, the profession of social psychology. This is what empathy is. So it's putting yourself in somebody else's shoes. Now, I think that is part of it, but I think it goes deeper than that, because you can put yourself into somebody else's shoes. You can imagine yourself in their situation and then do nothing about it. Not use that knowledge, that intelligence to actually inform some action or some behavior on your part. So I think we need to push this a little bit further, because it's all very well taking somebody else's perspective. But then if you then just jump back into habitually what you would normally do without that knowledge, then, well, what have you actually done? What value in addition are you adding to that experience or that relationship? Well, I would challenge that you probably aren't. So to me, empathy is, yes, putting yourself in those shoes, but it's also about considering how are you going to behave differently as a result of that perspective, as a result of that information or data that you've just collected. So for me, it's a very, very interesting idea that it's very behaviorally driven. Okay, and there's a lot of people who are actually using this. A lot of very successful people have kind of for themselves figured this out. So let's look at this from because I know a lot of people here on the session today are marketers. So let's look at this from a kind of a marketing perspective to start with, and then we'll expand it out a little bit. Okay, so this is the founder of Instagram, Mike Krieger, and he's of the opinion that empathy is key in the design process, and I would say of anything, product or a service or a platform or a software, especially when you start expanding outside of your comfort zone to new languages, cultures, and age groups. In other words, when we talk about being customer focused, what we must do if we are truly empathic is that we must be thinking beyond our paradigms, beyond just the way that we normally think about stuff. And let's not pay lip service to saying we're customer focused, but actually we're going to do what we want anyway. Because if we assume, and this is what Mike adds into this, if we assume what people want, we're likely to get it wrong. So empathy is not just about paying lip service to listening. It's not just about saying, hey, you know, I'm going to take your perspective, but actually really what I'm convincing myself is that I've listened and I've been customer focused or, you know, peer focused, but actually I'm going to do what I always do anyway. This is about properly committing to this thing. And when you have that information from your customer or from a peer or from your line manager or for somebody that works for you and with you, you're actually going to use it honestly, transparently, and in a valuable way to benefit the both of you. That to me is what empathy is about. It's about the action that comes from this knowledge of taking the other person's perspective. And I think that's really, really important in terms of actually making this thing happen. So we have other people who, again, in very senior, very successful kind of positions, you know, they all have a view on it. This is not just being tucked away in psychology circles, you know, where you have academics coming up with this concept. This is being used by significant people in the commercial world. CEO of Microsoft, for example, saying without empathy, it's not possible to get the best from your team. So for this reason, it is, now listen to this, the key to everything. Now, isn't that interesting when you have the CEO of Microsoft saying that empathy is the key to everything? So it's not about the technology. It's not about innovation. It's not about, you know, deep pockets of cash to buy this and to buy that. It's about it being the key to everything. So this whole idea of being a marketer, being a communicator, being a salesperson, being a leader, being an entrepreneur, if you're doing this without empathy, you're doing this, despite yourself being human. And so this is one of those wonderful sort of facets of being human. We have this potential to being an empath. Okay, so how are we going to do this? What are we going to use? If we think, okay, there might be something in this could be quite useful. Well, it allows us to really open up and be properly present. Because, I've talked in previous webinars here about being very kind of mindful, being very open to the moment and actually really paying attention and properly actively listening. Here it is coming again through loud and clear in being empathic. Empathy helps marketers, and pretty much all of us really, to break out their blind spots. This is somebody in a senior SVP role at PepsiCo. Okay, so empathy helps marketers to break out of their blind spots, open their eyes to the human side of the consumer, and flip the conversation from brand-led to people-led. So again, somebody very, very significant, very, very senior saying, look, guys, we've got to move the game on. This is not about thinking about the product, the service, the brand, the money, the cash, the sales. This is actually about being properly people-driven. So yet another successful person telling us that empathy is super important. So we should be listening to this. And empathy, if we're putting ourselves in the shoes of other people and really listening from their perspective, should, in theory, be able to inform us really, really deeply and quite profoundly about the needs and requirements and wishes and desires of that other person. So in this case, we're talking about a customer or a consumer. But of course, we can apply this to everybody we encounter, both close, but also maybe more of a distance. So this is one of the, as I say, an essential skill that really makes us grow as individuals. Now, I want to pick up on one of the words that we just saw in that quote, this whole idea of blind spots, because as human beings, from the day that we are born, and not only in work, but in our whole kind of natural living, we are creating habits. It's one of the ways that allows us to operate as human beings. It's one of those things that means we don't have to relearn everything at every moment. So we use our experience, we use our memories, and we create habits that allow us to fast track through our world. Yes, we kind of might suddenly wake up and be very present if there's something new that kind of jolts us out of this kind of autopilot that we all operate in. And it's fine being in autopilot to a degree. But what happens is, as we go around our day-to-day life, being not particularly awake because we're reliant on those memories and those habits, we tend to find we fall into this kind of lull, if you like, of just assuming and just kind of presuming and just taking for granted. And what happens is that we find that there are significant blind spots because we're not paying attention. So we make assumptions, we draw analogies, we don't really truly listen. And there's a lovely model, again, it comes from psychology circles, called the Johari window. Okay, and this allows us to kind of figure out what are our blind spots. And if we were really truly listening, if we were really truly awake, could we identify some things that, didn't actually realize that about other people, or I didn't realize I don't really take that seriously, or yeah, when I'm actually listening to somebody, but really what I'm doing is I'm planning what I'm going to have for tea tonight, or I'm planning, what I'm going to do this weekend. Yeah, I'm looking and I'm nodding and I'm pretending I'm listening to you, but actually I'm not really, I'm paying partial attention. Then this is where blind spot, blindness actually occurs. And the Johari window allows us to kind of just really understand that a big chunk of what we do on a day-to-day basis isn't really fully aware. We're not truly present. Empathic people who show and demonstrate empathy, are much, much smaller in their blind spot area. So, there are things that they do and things that they say and things that they feel and think that they know that they're doing, and then so they're actually actively doing it, and others know that too. And we would call that the open section of their life. There's stuff that you know, but you keep it quiet and you keep it hidden from other people. That would be kind of like a hidden part of your life. But there are other things, and again, this is where empaths score really well in their blind spots. They have very small blind spots because they're very, very open to receiving from others feedback. So there's other things that people observe about you that you're not really aware of because you're not truly listening. You're not truly taking on that information and interpreting that information from the world. You're just making assumptions and you're not really present and you're not really actively listening. So that is when you fall into this blind spot. And it is that kind of feeling that, what happened today? It was just another day like any other day. I didn't really learn anything. I didn't really see anything. And that's because you're not practicing empathy. The world can see it, but it's a blind spot to you. So the Johari window is just another little technique that allows us to identify that we all do it, but what we want to try and do is really be actively listening, really opening up so that we can understand that what other people see about us, we can start to pick up from the world around us. So it is about being present. It is about truly actively listening. And it is about really understanding that there are a lot of people on this journey with us because the science will tell us that, and this is a statistic from Nature Neuroscience, that only about 1% to 2% of the overall population are true empaths, people who truly put themselves into other people's shoes and actually then act on what they see and hear. They actually absorb that feeling and that thought from the other person and they do something about it. So they're continually developing themselves because they are super sensitive to that interaction having with the other people. Most of us maybe are on a journey to being a little bit more like that. So we want to be open, we want to be helpful, we want to add value to those around us. But we're not true empaths because we're a little bit closed. We might have barriers that we put up. We don't really truly want to step into the other person's shoes because we're too busy. So we're all on this kind of journey, and a very, very small number of people are actually very, very skilled at this. So it is, if you're an empath and you really are a true empath, you are significantly in the minority. And again, that is fine. There's, as with all these things, there are pros and cons to this, okay? And there is science behind this. The more you do sort of research into this, what you'll find is that there's a lot of science behind the way that we are kind of programmed as individuals to kind of almost shut ourselves off to being an empath because there is a drain on us. For some people who are true empaths, in other words, they take on the energy, the emotions, the feelings, and they really do take it on and they embody that from others. It is actually a drain. It is actually quite an all-consuming thing. So we have to tread carefully on this journey. This is not something that I'm advocating and saying, you've got to move now from not being an empath in any shape or form to being suddenly fully loaded as an empath. There's a balance to strike here, and that's really what I want to explore now, is kind of, well, both what you can do, but also how far you should take this, okay? But the key thing about this, and then let's get this one thing really, really straight, being an empath doesn't necessarily mean you have to be all smiley, you have to make people happy, you have to be consistently nice, and I'm going to use that word. Sometimes when you actually work with this whole concept of empathy, you might consciously choose to ignore what you take on and what you feel and what you sense about another person. So their perspective you might disagree with, and that is fine. Being an empath doesn't mean you have to agree. Being an empath is actually taking that information, interpreting it, and then figuring out how you're going to use it. You might purposely ignore this information because it doesn't serve the situation or the other person or you. If you're being conscious, being really appropriate and very aware of how you're dealing with this information, then that is being an empath, okay? So being an empath is not that you have to take on everybody else's crap, okay? That is not what this is about. It's about listening, it's about observing, it's about feeling and sensing, maybe adding a little bit of a sort of intuitive, a kind of like a gut feel kind of interpretation to what you take in. but then actually treating that data, let's call it data for a moment, treating it in a neutral way. Because the more you can be objective about what you sense and what you bring in, the more value you can add to what you're going to do with that knowledge. Okay, because useful empaths will use that data and that information in a neutral sense. So they'll take a little bit on, maybe, but what they'll do is they'll use it in a really useful sense to craft better tactics, to inspire loyalty, to be more clear in their communication, to make better plans, to put the right people in the right roles, to kind of just help the environment around them. So being an empath in business doesn't mean that you're just one of these kind of woolly people who are just going to sit there and smile and just, oh yes, come and talk to me about, sort of love and this, that, and the other. That's not what this is about. Some people fall into that trap of thinking that is it, but it isn't. It's a neutral data science, okay, that gives you and empowers you with the opportunity to make good decisions for you and the other person. And that is really, really important. So why is this really important? So let's get down to the real kind of nuts and bolts of why this is important, in business. So you could be in a very, very junior role and you have a number of people around you that you need to influence and work with. You have a line manager, maybe you're being asked to present to others in the organization. This is important to you. Okay, if you're in a leadership role or you're the chief exec or you're setting up a new business, this is also important to you. It doesn't matter the level of experience that you have or the role that you're performing. Empathy is essential in business, period. Okay. So the 4 things I want you to start thinking about if you think that this is something that might add some value to the awareness that you have on a moment-to-moment basis in work, then the first thing is to think about empathy is essential because it will help you to establish a genuine and authentic, that's a key word, connection with those around you. Okay, by taking on this knowledge and this information, this data that we're talking about, it potentially does, because you're paying super attention to those around you, it potentially offers up the opportunity for you to be manipulative, for you to use it in a non-authentic way. So what I'm encouraging you to do for everybody's benefit, including your own, is to use this in an authentic way. So you're doing this for everybody's higher good, okay? You're adding value for everybody in a win-win perspective. When we talked before about negotiation, it was all about the win-win, not as a compromise, but that genuinely everybody wins. Having good intention in empathy is essential for getting this right, because this is a powerful tool. Once you learn the art of being an empath and being more empathic than you are right now, you'll find that you have a power, okay? You have an energy, you have an opportunity to make choices. So I would strongly encourage you to make those choices for the greater good and for the good of you and those around you. Don't, whatever you try and do, use this for manipulation. That is not a fair and reasonable way of using this extra power that you're going to gain. Number 2 is that it helps you to find a balance between different points of view. As that quote that we heard earlier said, you cannot do effective marketing, communications, sales, negotiation, all those things without actually really truly balancing different points of view. Because everybody in communication, in conversation, and in language is coming at things from a slightly different perspective. Nobody has had your life experience, okay? You are a unique being in this world of however many billion people on this planet. So everybody has a different point of view, even if it's very subtly different. So finding a balance between those different points of view without judgment and actually welcoming that different point of view is a surefire way of becoming more empathic. Just having that curiosity and just using the listening power and those skills that you have to really kind of open up, well, what can I learn from this person? And of course, that in itself will be number 3, which is deepening these professional relationships. You'll know if you've listened to me before, I love the phrase professional intimacy. That's what we're looking for here. We're looking to become more intimate in our conversations and relationships, because by doing those deeper dives into what's really in it for the other person, what is really in it for me, can we meet in this kind of this sweet spot in between us and actually both get a win out of this? If we can, that is a surefire way of deepening that professional relationship. And also number 4, it gives us an opportunity to more effectively negotiate and influence. Always, always, always with good intention, as we say, but the words more effectively. You'll do this stuff. If you are empathic, you will do this stuff more quickly, more efficiently, and it will become one of those day-to-day habits, those moment-to-moment habits that just make it a nicer place to be, both for you and those around you. So when you're going into work, you think, oh, here we go, it's another day in the office, or it's another day on the screen. If you're an empath, you will never be feeling that again, because you will see every interaction that you have as an opportunity to learn, as an opportunity to develop, as an opportunity to expand both you and the other person, just from an empathic relationship and an empathic connection and interaction. So it's really quite exciting. I mean, this is why I'm saying it's an essential skill, not a soft skill, because what it allows you to do is to take that negotiation, conversation, sales encounter to the next level. Gary Vee talks a lot about empathy. And when he talks about it in sales, and I'll just quote what he says here, he says that whether you're a salesperson, an operator, or a business person, if you can understand what the other person is thinking and what their goals are, and this is key, this is the key bit, you can reverse engineer those aims and map it back to your goals too. That knowledge sets you up to win. You'll both win. I love this quote. When I found this quote a few years ago, I just kept reading it because I thought, my God, that is everything when it comes to empathy. This whole idea of reverse engineering their aims and your aims, map the stuff that you hear from this other person, truly embody what they're experiencing, and think, how can I actually offer up what I've got to offer and try and match it with actually what the person is looking for? So it could be you're trying to help them solve a personal problem. Maybe it's something to do with their mental well-being that you're kind of having this conversation and you're looking for clues and tips and ideas to kind of share with them. Or maybe you're in a sales situation where you're trying to solve a problem with the product or service that you have to offer. It's about matching the two things together. It's really exciting. This is like pieces of the jigsaw puzzle. And of course, when we start to sort of play with this, what it does imply is that actually the big chunk of what we're doing here is about this listening. And I love the extension that Gary takes this on, and he expands on the quote by saying, I'm very aware that 99% of you reading this think that I'm a mouth, but I promise you that I'm an ear disguised as a mouth. So if you don't know Gary Vee, he is a very chatty, talkative human. And yet he's a great listener. He just processes, as an empath, he processes everything at lightning speed. So he is a mouth, but he's disguised his ear as a mouth. So in other words, he's constantly listening. He's constantly in this conversation. And he's reverse engineering what he hears back into something that's going to work for him, but also work for you as well. And so empathy is this kind of dance, if you like, between the information data that you're sensing from the other person, some of the stuff that you're bringing on, and then actually mirroring or matching that with what it is that you need or that you have to offer or the value that you can bring. So how? I guess at this point, you're probably sort of sat there listening to this thinking, okay, I get it, Neil, come on, tell me how I can actually start on this journey, because I think it might be quite important or something fun to play with. Right, so we've got 3 different types of empathy that we need to look at, okay? So there's cognitive empathy, emotional empathy, and compassionate empathy. And so these 3 levels or types of empathy, and they are levels because they're levels of intimacy, if you like, with this whole idea of empathy. They are quite different. So cognitive empathy is where that you're perceiving that you know how the other person feels and thinks. Okay, so most people, when they say, oh yeah, that person's really empathic, that's actually what they're describing, that somebody thinks that they know, or they perceive they know what the other person is feeling and thinking. And most marketers will be at that level. They'll be thinking, oh, I know my customer, I've developed this persona, and I kind of know what they think and feel. Okay, now I'm going to challenge that you don't really, at the cognitive level, you don't really, that's you thinking you know. At the emotional empathy level, this is the next level deeper. At the emotional empathy level, you are feeling the other person's emotions within you. Now think about that for a minute. So if you're a marketer and you think you know your customer, do you actually feel what it's like to use your product and service? Do you feel inside you, actually physically feel what it is to experience your brand, your product, your service, or you in an interaction? Because if you do, then you're practicing emotional empathy. So that is the next level deeper. It's fine being a cognitive empath. That is totally fine. I'm not saying there's anything right or wrong with these. It's just their levels of depth. Okay, and there's pros and cons to all of this. So at the second level, emotional empathy, you're not just thinking you know how the other person feels, you're actually taking on some of that emotion. Okay, so you're taking on some of their energy within you. And the third level, and this is really the quite profound one, is the compassionate empathy level, where you are feeling that you're driven to respond and actually act on the other person's feelings and behaviors. Okay, so this is where you really are taking it on and embodying the other person's emotions. Now, when we talked about the empaths at the kind of true empath at the 1 or 2% level, they are going to be compassionate empaths. In other words, they are fully embodying and acting upon and actually really feeling some of the stress, some of the angst, some of the anxiety, some of the pain of the other person, not just thinking, oh, that must be difficult for you, but they're actually physically embodying it. And that can come out in symptoms and even dis-ease. There's an interesting word there, which I'll cover another time in another webinar, but disease, the manifestation of dis-ease. In other words, an imbalance of the energy that you're picking up from somebody else. At the level of compassionate empathy, this is a hugely powerful thing because the other person is going to know that you get it. They're going to know that you really are feeling it too, because you're driven to behave and feel as they are. But of course, very clearly, for a lot of us who are not at that level, we will very quickly understand that there are pros and cons of that. So at the cognitive level, being an empath is you can step into their shoes, but there's no energy drain on yourself. You can distance yourself a little bit naturally. So this is what most marketers will do. They'll say, yeah, I can see our products and brands from the customer's perspective. Yeah, I can see that. Yeah, this is how it would look. And they think that's enough. And maybe it is. You've got to make that judgment call and that decision. At the emotional level, because it's a deeper level of interaction, an emotional empath will find that there's a potential energy drain on them. In other words, they came into the conversation, which was a very difficult conversation with a member of staff or a colleague who was having some really tough times right now, and they leave that conversation feeling a little bit drained. Now, it could be drained in a positive way, but more likely or not, it's going to be drained in a negative or challenging way. And that you're going to have to learn to deal with. You're going to have to get some coping strategies to be able to do that. At a compassionate empath level, things happen and change, okay? It's a great way of making a difference to somebody. If you can truly take away some of their pain because you do embody it, but know at the same time, because you did that, they are going to potentially become a little bit of what we might term, and this is a popular phrase right now, and you hear this a lot, energy vampires. In other words, they see you as a crutch. They see you as somebody, oh, I can just go and talk to Neil because he's always there, he'll always listen to me, and oh, I feel so much better afterwards. But what's actually happening there? Because if you're a compassionate empath, they're downloading their energy and their angst and their anxiety onto you. And so you're absorbing it, and they are literally using you as a drain for their negativity. So there is a challenge here to be able to manage this situation. And for some of us, we do have challenging colleagues and we do have challenging people in our worlds. We just need to be conscious and aware at all times of how deep and of how far and of how intimate we are willing to go. So based on where you are, and everybody listening to us, all of us here on this session here today, are going to be at different levels. It's not about it's right or wrong to be at any of these levels. You just need to be aware that these levels exist. So if you're in a conversation or in an encounter, that you're just aware how you're looking to play this, where you're looking to go with this, how much kind of personal protection or barriers or things you want to put in place to be able to protect yourself, to be able to add value. Don't push it too far. you'll get drained. Don't do it too light, otherwise you won't be adding value. So it is about playing with it, being super present, really listening, and being conscious of those decisions and those balances that you do. And just be careful if you do decide to go down that whole compassionate route and really open yourself up to be that super compassionate empath. Be careful not to fuel any biases. You know, we talk a lot about subconscious bias, and actually fueling some of the judgments that we make, even subconsciously as individuals. What we don't want to be doing here is kind of taking our eye off the prize, taking our eye off the game, and losing our objectivity. Be very, very careful to be conscious about, we've got some objective aims to solve here. We've got some challenges to deal with. It's not just about us individually solving it. We might need to go for professional help or get somebody who technically knows, or, you know, we might need to get some sort of medical intervention if this is a health and well-being thing. So be careful not to overdo it. There is a danger here that you can get really swept away with this and feel really excited that you're, you know, solving everybody's problems. Just be careful. Okay, where you need to call in an expert, call in an expert. So for most of us, we're going to go with what we might term empathy light. Okay, so as a manager or a leader or somebody who wants to become more effective in their work, we can take on the idea, and Brené Brown, if you've come across Brené's work, she is an incredible person who talks a lot about empathy and vulnerability. And vulnerability is one of those concepts at work that is still, it's kind of on the periphery. It's not really fully embraced because vulnerability is often seen as a weakness. It is a hugely powerful empathic skill. Okay, so if you're interested in this topic and you want to read more, go and have a look at Brené Brown's work and search Brené Brown vulnerability, because it will open up your eyes to a whole different way of interacting at work. But Brené says that empathy is simply listening, holding space, withholding judgment, emotionally connecting, and communicating that incredibly healing message of you are not alone. Okay, so from Brené's perspective, it is literally just about saying, I'm here for you. So empathy light is just about turning up, showing up, actively listening, holding the space, paying attention, not checking as you're in this deep conversation, checking your emails and quickly looking at the time as a sort of sneaky thing out the corner of your eye, just to sort of like, yeah, we've only got another 5 minutes here, guys, so I can't kind of, you know, spend a little bit longer, but, you know, tell me more, and then expect to get a good result. This is all about setting the boundaries effectively and letting the other person know they're not alone. So empathy light can be done in a light touch, but a hugely powerful and really, really consciously and profoundly effective way. So if you're interested in those kinds of techniques, have a little look at Brené's work, because it really is very, very powerful. So there are some little checklists here, things that we can sort of focus on. So active listening, I've mentioned this a few times. It is so, so important. Giving full attention. If you are going to do empathy light within work, and this is empathy deep as well as empathy light, is do give full attention. Do not be distracted. You know, even if it's only 10 minutes, if it's 10 minutes of quality time, this is what you would do in a sales situation. You would have all eyes, all ears, all attention on your customer. Well, you've got to do this actually with peers as well, all colleagues, all the people who work for you. So be present. Okay, block this time out and make sure this is focused, positive time. And give constructive feedback. I've used in the last few moments, I've used the word objective quite a few times. Being empathic is not about being subjective, okay? It is about staying in the objective. In other words, it is about constructive feedback. Yes, you can nod, and yes, you can sympathize to a point with the other person, but it's not all about agreeing and falling into the place where they might be. Because if the both of you are going to have to try and get out of this same hole, that is going to be a challenge. So try and maintain a natural and healthy distance to the person, physical distance, but also emotional distance. You need to get close enough to them so that they feel that you are there and paying attention and in the conversation, but far enough away just so that you can kind of keep that objectivity and appear responsive. eye contact, all the stuff that we talked about in communication and negotiation. It's about the eye contact. It's about the paying attention. And it is also about, and I think this is the big one for me, and I always have this in my top 3 tips right at the end for this, is it's about paraphrasing. Okay, don't just sit there silently nodding the whole way through. Make sure if you are using empathy in an encounter with somebody else, and it's a deep, important conversation, make sure that not only are you appearing responsive, but that you're paraphrasing what the other person is saying. In other words, you're repeating back to them some of the key points, just so that you get clarity and you get confirmation back that you have heard correctly, because of course it's all about perception, but also the other person gets the opportunity to understand that, yeah, this person's still on my side. They're listening. They really do get what I'm saying. It's kind of, they're where I need to be. Yes, they're actually still paying attention. So paraphrasing, just reconfirming the stuff that they're saying is really, really important. And as you develop this as part of the whole kind of emotional intelligence thing, you do need to keep your ego in check, okay, to start this thing off. This is about removing judgment, okay, because you don't really have any idea what's going on in this other person's life, not really. You know, there'll be stuff in their Johari window that they wanting to keep hidden. They will have blind spots, much as you do. And there'll be stuff that's unknown that neither of you are aware of. We just know that. That is what's being human. And so by accepting that you're not going to judge here, you're not going to load this with, well, I think you should do this, and I think you should do that, because in my experience, etc., etc. That is not what this is about. This is about scanning and sorting large amounts of data or information, figuring out actually as you're listening, well, what is noise? What is actually, can we cut through to the real chase here? Can we cut through to the truth? And then can we slowly but surely start to strike a balance and focus in on that? Because once you open up as an empath to somebody else, there's a lot of storytelling that's going to happen. There's a lot of interpretation, a lot of baggage, a lot of threads and connections to the past that might not be serving the current situation are going to emerge. And this will happen at a light level, but also sometimes a profoundly deep level. So part of your role here is about practicing self-awareness. How am I feeling about what this person's saying? How am I going to balance this? Can I cut through to actually what is going on here? Will they share with me if I truly listen and I'm really, really present? Can I actually find out really what's going on? Can I, sift out from this chaos of this seeming chaos of this situation? Can I sort out what is actually essential information? And if I can do that and practice that over time, well, maybe, just maybe, I'm going to be able to add a little bit of value in terms of the feedback that I give. Not that as an empath, I've got to have all the answers. It's not what this is about. This is not about you knowing everything about everything, but it's about just replaying, just being that mirror, just being that kind of sounding board, if you like, so the other person is able to maybe just align some of their thinking. It may be a slightly less subjective, less kind of baggage heavy way. You will have done your job if you can get them through that to that point. And one of the other little techniques that you can use as well, and if this does sound of interest and you are having maybe challenging conversations at work, or you're trying to sort of coach somebody through a situation that they're in, one of the things that you can use is cognitive behavioral theory, CBT. You might have heard of this before. If you haven't, do recommend that you go and have a little bit of a search on this one. This is helping people out of unhelpful repetitive loops, because again, as human beings, it's all about the habits that we're in. And typically when somebody is in an unhelpful loop, they're kind of locked in. So they're thinking about something and that makes them feel something, and then they behave in a specific way because of those feelings and thoughts. And then because they behave that way, they think about the same thing again, and it makes them feel the same way. So they're kind of locked into this thoughts, feelings, behaviors loop. And often, and we all do it, I'm not saying I never get locked in, we all do. This is kind of the way we're programmed, and it's a simple technique, but it's a really, really quite interesting one. If you can help somebody out, either by focusing on what they're thinking, or focusing on what they're feeling, or focus on how they're behaving as a result of those things, if they could just find a little way of changing one of those things, the loop is broken. Okay, so if you can get somebody to kind of react in a slightly different way, and this is why things like If somebody's feeling very anxious, often if you can get them to slow down and breathe deeply, that might change the behavior that knocks them out of that thoughts, feelings, behaviors loop. Or if they're constantly thinking about that same person and that same situation, if you can get them to reframe that thinking, they'll feel differently about it, and then they'll behave and react bodily in a different way. Or if they're kind of feeling in a certain way, can you change that feeling? Can you just get them to, again, reframe how they're feeling about that other person or that situation? They'll think about it differently, and then they won't get that physical reaction. So CBT loop is a really interesting thing, and empaths just know this intuitively. They do this in a natural way, but for some of us who maybe aren't quite so empathic, this is a nice little tool that you can use to just knock people out of those repetitive behaviors that aren't serving them, and share the idea. You know, this isn't something that you just keep to yourself as an empath. Tell them what's going on, do a little bit of research, figure this loop out for yourself, and find some examples for yourself. Play with this. It's a really, really, really interesting science, and we all do it, and we all are doing it day in, day out. And once you realize that, this is one tool that really does help you to be very, very present as you go through some of these experiences. It's really quite an interesting one to play with. If you need more detail, seek medical professional help with this, because it won't be applicable to everything. So there may well be situations where it's getting a little bit too deep for you. Seek professional help. That is always the end answer here. So the answer really is, what we're saying here is, you can learn and develop your empathy skills. You know, being an empath is something you can teach. It is something you can develop as a habit. It isn't something that's necessarily always innate in you. I would say I've been developing over the last, say, 10 years, my sort of empathy skills. I'm a little bit better than I was. I was okay at it. I'm a pretty good active listener, just, you know, naturally. But I've got skills and stuff that I need to learn. You know, a lot of us are on a journey for this. And if you can view situations, you know, without getting too emotionally invested in them, you can stay a little bit objective. If you can make sure that you're balancing empathy, but objectively, so results are met, then it's not going to overburden both their and your well-being. It will help you to establish, you know, rapport with colleagues. You know, you are going to see profound differences in those relationships and the way that you kind of interact with others. People would think, that person, they give time to me. It's like, I really enjoy spending time with them. I want to go for a coffee with that person. It's really great. We always come up with amazing ideas. They're just sort of really, really good. They don't judge me. You know, they don't kind of sort of preload it, and they always listen. This is how people are going to start responding to you, even if you do that empathy light approach. And as I said earlier, and this is the really, really important thing, with empathy, it doesn't mean you have to agree, okay? Validating other people's perspectives does not mean that you're agreeing with them. So you can always say, I hear what you're saying, I understand what you're saying, I can see it and feel it from your perspective. However, from my perspective, it looks a little bit like this. Should we talk about this? And they will know then, because you've kind of paraphrased their scenario and their situation. It's just opened up those connections, those neural links and those energy flows between the two of you to open up to some really great opportunities that otherwise literally would not have happened. And very successful business leaders really are doing this. I was reading around this topic just prior to the webinar to see if I could find some really nice examples to share with you. And there's a Forbes contributor, Prudie Gergachon, who's actually written some amazing articles on the Forbes.com website around the topic of empathy. And I just wanted to share one with you. If you're sat there thinking, this all feels like too big an investment of my time, I've got a load of other stuff I want to do. To me, this was a lovely quote, a really nice piece of, you know, sort of wise advice that I thought I'd share with you. And so Prudie says, very successful business leaders are often extremely fast information processors. With my clients who do not suffer fools gladly, I recommend taking a moment to deploy a bit of empathy. What's behind a colleague's wish to propose what immediately looks like a dumb idea? Follow with an empathic comment along the lines of, I can see why you got excited about that because it's an important issue. But unfortunately, it would raise compliance problems, so we can't pursue that route. And so Prudie says a 90-second investment of time can prevent the employees feeling humiliated and disaffected in the long term. So think about the investment there, being empathic to how the other person is feeling when they come up with an idea, and not just shooting it down because you haven't got time or there aren't the resources for it, or, oh my goodness, there's another idea from that person. Embracing the idea and giving them a really well thought through 90-second answer shows empathy. It shows that you value that person's contribution, even though the answer is a definite no. And I just love that way of using Empathy Light to actually help people to understand the part that they're going to play in the organization and working with you, and also just how much you value their ideas and their inputs. So you could use this in a very short, punchy way if you're managing a project or a campaign, or you've got to get people engaged on a particular activity with a customer, whatever it happens to be. Even though they might seem like a crazy idea, welcome the crazy idea and follow it with an empathic comment that genuinely shows, like that comment there, I can see why you got excited about that, because it's an important issue. In other words, a really empathic comment back. So figure out the kinds of things that you could put into an equivalent situation. How would you respond to somebody who comes up with some crazy idea that you know is never going to happen? But how could you reply to that person honestly and authentically, to welcoming that comment or that idea, but actually go back to them with an empathic sentence rather than just, we can't do that, we haven't got the time or resource. Go back and actually reflect. Yeah, I can see why you would do that. That's great. I can feel why you got excited by that. That's empathy. Okay, that is the difference between shooting somebody down and actually getting somebody on side and really developing that professional intimacy. I just love that little quote, that little paragraph, because to me, that was the way to do it. So there are 7 ways you can learn and develop your empathy, but actually stop absorbing other people's emotions. In other words, put enough barriers in when you start doing this so it doesn't go too deep. If you name the feeling, figure out if somebody's coming up and trying to offload everything onto you, do those feelings belong to you or somebody else? It's the somebody else. So keep a natural, healthy distance. Make sure you're grounded. Make sure that you're sitting there in such a way that you're not there as an open channel. Be self-aware throughout. Maybe even if things are getting really heavy, and you can use this in negotiations, in presentations, visualize a glass wall between you and the other person. I like to think of it, because I'm quite introverted, or very introverted, I like to think a lot of the time I have invisible shields, as I described them, and I can bring those across whenever I need them. So you don't see them on the other side, but I know that they're there to protect me. So you might have a visualize a glass wall, you might have invisible shields, but just know that as you're developing your empathy, you need to be safe. You need to be in a safe, grounded space. But be curious, allow yourself to experiment and play with some of these ideas and some of the ways that you respond, but have strong boundaries. And if you do find yourself, subject to an emotional vampire, energy vampire, is allow yourself to release the emotion afterwards, not with the person, but elsewhere. Rationalize that conversation, really go deeply into kind of, well, what happened there? Review it, understand what happened, so that you don't then take on their emotions and their baggage for the rest of the day. That is really, really important to do. So don't just feel the empathy, use it. As we said right at the start, with putting this into action with, a marketing sense, businesses love to say that the customer's always right. And they always love to listen to the customer, but their actions need to reciprocate that statement. So get deeper into those customer relationships. Really, truly listen if you're using this for marketing. Empathy in marketing is huge. Empathy with real people is even bigger. But it's all about what you're going to do with that knowledge and information and data. It's not about just sitting in their shoes. That's really important. So listen, train your brain, really work with your team. That's a great starting point. Learn to recognize any biases or judgments that are coming through. So, be very, very present. Don't take advantage of empathy. It's always with good intention. And even in a challenging situation, don't assume the worst. There's positive in everything. Everything is yin and yang. Everything is balance. So use that knowledge, use that ability to kind of flip things and maybe challenge things in the opposite. If somebody comes at you with a very negative thing, say, well, okay, what's the inverse of that? Could we just reframe that and kind of work from there? Empathy is all about balance, and little actions, as we've seen, little comments, little ways of just playing things back can make an absolutely huge difference to how people perceive you and you as a communicator. So what are my top 3 empathy tips? Very, very simple. Smile. Instant engagement, instant opening up of those energy channels for communication. Listen actively. Don't let anything take your attention away. If you find it drifting, bring yourself back in. And really importantly, when you're in a conversation, paraphrase. So occasionally, when it's appropriate, feeding back to the person saying, can I just summarize what I think I heard you say, is a really, really strong way of demonstrating, not just being an empath, but actually demonstrating empathy. So smile, listen actively, and paraphrase. So that's what I want to share with you on the subject of empathy, and a key component of becoming more emotionally intelligent. We have the chat facility available here. So if you do have any questions or observations for the next few minutes, feel free to pop those into the chat box. And I just want to bring you, or make you aware if you weren't already, the next one in the series, this will be webinar 12 we've got coming up on the 29th of October, same time, on Friday the 29th at 11 AM UK time. We're going to be looking at continuous improvement, how you can continually improve both in your personal working, but also as a team in your product development, in your marketing, and pretty much everything that you do at work, processes, systems, and stuff. So a really, really good way of actually cutting through the business as usual kind of philosophy that a lot of organizations have right now, trying to get back to normal. There is no such thing. So we're going to look at how you can innovate and use continuous improvement in your work, in all senses of the word. And then on the 12th of November, the next one in the series is resilience in work. How you can use planning and resilience and become, a real kind of superpower within your organization. So being resilient, not in a negative way in any shape or form, this is positive resilience, is a really important thing right now, because we live in challenging, changing, chaotic, and very uncertain times. So developing resilience skills is a really nice way of building a real comfort, if you like, in your day-to-day activities. So we've got those two coming up in the next month. So register for those at marketingcollege.com/events. And as always with these things, you do need to register in advance, but it would be great to see you there. And I know a number of you are regularly coming back to each of these, so you'll know the process. But if this is your first time, yes, feel free to register for those. And if we aren't already connected, you can search me out on LinkedIn and Twitter particularly. Be great to connect with you. And because I'm sharing lots more information about these kinds of topics through LinkedIn and Twitter. So search for Neil Wilkins X, and also feel free to subscribe or listen to our podcasts. That's the Cambridge Marketing Podcast on Apple, and other platforms are available, and also the Neil Wilkins Podcast, where you will find recordings of this and plenty of other topics around the subject of mindful marketing and mindful living. So it would be great to see you on those. And if you do have any ideas of any kind of topics that you'd like us to cover, feel free to drop either Lauren or I a message. It would be great to be always serving the needs of the audience, because we're hopefully trying to produce an empathic way of gauging the kinds of topics that you'd like us to be covering. So do let us know. It'd be really, really good to hear from you if you've got a nice idea of a good topic that we can add into the mix. We do have lots of other topics and subjects that we'd like to cover with you, but if you've got a good idea, let us know. We'd love to hear from you. So thank you very much for coming along to the session today. We've really enjoyed setting this one up and presenting it for you, and hope you found it of interest. And I will look forward, as I'm sure Lauren will, to welcoming you to the next one, Continuous Improvement, on the 29th of October. Have a great rest of your day wherever you are, and go and develop those empathy skills.